Hi everyone, and we are going to sketch out some ideas for modifications to a light switch cover. So I've brought in some measurements from the real world object that we want to modify. We can use these in TinkerCAD to make sure that our parts are going to fit. While we're sketching, we're just thinking about how we can attach components to modify the actual object of the light switch cover. And if you take a look at things people have done using this shape, you'll find that you can make some very interesting additional functionality. There's even a back scratcher in case you plan to lean up against your light switch covers. But more often, you'll be making a design that changes or adds to the functionality rather than changing it. So I have seen some assistive measures, like an attachment. While this is not part of the cover, it is meant to attach to it using the screws that are there already, so that you can have a long handle for kids or someone who cannot reach to be able to pull or push to change your light switch. For my design, I'm going to simply add to the light switch cover itself an attachment that will make it into a coat hook so that I can have my coat or hat right by the door to grab as I turn off the lights. We're going to use TinkerCAD to create our modified light switch cover replacement. And while a light switch cover is a very common object that you might be able to find an STL already, and you can use the import function in here or in another software to pull in an existing file and then modify that, we're going to create it from scratch in TinkerCAD to show how we can use our dimensions, which I've got a set of dimensions for my light switch cover. They're in inches. And we can see that our grid right here is in millimeters. So I have snap grid down here set to 1 millimeter. I can click on the edit grid button here, which I'll need to do first before I start working on this. Click on millimeters and change it to inches. So now I'll be able to switch my measurements in inches, and we'll be able to use the measurements I have for our light switch cover. So I'll start by dragging out a box here, and I'm going to change the dimensions for the box inside of its shape toolbar here. This is important because the starting dimensions here in this panel control how the radius looks, as when I turn up the radius it rounds off the corners, and I want to use this to make rounded edges. But if I were to stretch this out, in here you can see that my rounded edges get stretched out. So instead, I'm going to change the measurements here. So I want this thing to be 4.5 by 2 3/4, 2.75. I prefer to work in millimeters, as switching between fractions and decimals is kind of a nuisance. But for this, we'll stick with inches until we have all of our measurements correct. So I can see that I have this block now that is the right size here, but is extremely thick. However, if I change my height down to our 1/4 inch, 0.25, we're going to have the roundness all the way around and coming back. And I want it to be round on the top and then come to a flat surface where it's going to go against the wall so that I can hollow it out. In order to do that in TinkerCAD, I'm going to undo this move and leave it at 1 inch. But I'm going to bring this down so that it goes down right 3/4, one more. There we go. And I only want to keep the part that is sticking up out of the surface. So let's drag in another box that is already set to hole. In TinkerCAD, anything can be either a solid or a hole. There's just some conveniently already set boxes at the top here. We'll stretch this out to cover the entire shape. And then we will flip it upside down so that we're cutting off the part that's underneath the ground. Do that looking at it from above. If I click on my height measurement handle, I can drag it all the way down underneath. And now, if I were to group these together, we'll end up cutting off the bottom, but the entire thing is quite a bit thick. And if we want this to fit well onto a light fixture or a light switch fixture there, we're going to need it to be a little bit thinner on the inside. And to do that, I'm just going to make a duplicate of itself all the way over here, turn that duplicate into a hole, and we'll move it down. Go down 1/8 of an inch, and group these things together again. Now we have cut the underside out. Let's change this color to be a little easier to see, so that the whole thing is 1/8 of an inch thick. Now we need our holes for mounting, and my measurements show that they are 3/16 in diameter. So we'll drag out a cylinder here. We'll turn up the number of sides to make it very smooth, and we'll drag our corner handle in here, and we'll hold down Shift so that they both move at the same time. I'll just drag it down until it is at 3/16. That's stretch this up a little bit, although it only needs to be as tall as this. So we have a hole that's appropriate for the screw. Now that I have one of the holes, I am going to duplicate it. And let's zoom in here so it's easier to click on it without clicking on any of those handles. And I can drag it out and see that I actually see the measurements for how far I'm moving it on the screen. And if I click on this number right after I let go, I can actually type in the measurement so that it moves exactly the amount that I want. So I'll put in 2.375. And now we can zoom out a bit. So we have our two holes that are the correct distance from each other. Hold down Shift and select the first one, and we're going to group them together without any other objects. If you make a group that only contains holes, they will just be added together since there's nothing for them to cut out. Now I have two holes that will stay exactly that distance apart. We can select our main shape here, click on the Align tool, and let's zoom out so we can see our handles. Now I can center it in both directions. Now our holes will be lined up. And lastly, I will need a hole that is 1 inch already by 3/8. 3/8. Oops. Make sure that's only one. And we're going to hold down Shift once again, select that, choose the Align tool, but I don't want to move the plate since it's already lined up with the holes. So I'm going to click on the plate itself, and the Align tool will line up with the plate. So now I can center this, and we have the hole for our light switch, completing our wall plate. Let's select all of these objects and group them together. Now I have a functional 3D printable light switch cover. I want to add the hook to the bottom of it so that it will also function as a hat or a coat rack. And I will add a cylinder to it to make this smoother. And looking over from the side, we want to make this just as thick as the rest of our ball plate. And we're going to stretch it out so that it covers some space below it. I just need an area to attach my hook to so that it's not so close that I'll be hitting the light switch when I try to put something on it. And I'm using a cylinder since it looks a little nicer than just a box. We could, of course, take the rounded box that is our switch cover and extend the whole thing out. That would be another way to do it. But I'm going to take this and add a curved hook to it. And since I want the whole thing to look rounded, I'm going to go down and use a torus for this shape. Torus starts out as a nice donut, but I only want enough to make a quarter of a circle here to make a hook. So let's head back up to the box, and we will cut the top off, duplicate it, and cut the side off. We'll group these shapes together, and then so that it has a round end on it, I'll drag out a sphere. And let's zoom in our fit to view here. Hold down Shift and drag one of our handles in on the sphere until it is the same size as our hook. And now I can group these together. I've already got a group with holes, but I can group it again with this shape to add it together. You can group as many times as you like. It just makes the object more and more complicated as you add more and more shapes to it. So we'll take our hook and rotate it 90 degrees. Be very careful with the rotate tool. If you go outside of the circle, you will be able to rotate it 1 degree at a time. But if you do accidentally move it and you do some other things later, when you come back to the rotate tool, it simply says 0. It does not remember how far you rotated it. So having to line it up again by hand can be very difficult. I'll undo that accidental rotation and I'll hit D to drop it on the floor. And now our hook is obviously far too small, so we'll hold down Shift so that it doesn't stretch out, and I'll just grow the whole thing until it seems big enough. Look at this from above so that it's easier to move around. We want this hook to be sturdy enough that I can actually hang some piece of clothing on it, stretch it out a little bit. And now, just to make sure that everything is symmetrical, I'll select everything and use the Align tool to line them up in the center. And at this point, I could group the entire thing, but if I look at this from the underside, it's very important when making any 3D model to always look around the different sides. I can see that there is this area inside here. It could become difficult to screw this into the light switch if this bump here is getting in the way. So we want to use the hole that we cut in the bottom of this to cut through this one in the same exact way. So first, I'm going to click on our light switch here, and we're going to ungroup it one time. See that we have all of our holes here. I'm going to click on the light switch again and ungroup it again. So the previous hole that I have found is the one where I cut the underside out. Now that I have these holes visible again, if I select everything, the holes are going to cut through every solid object that overlaps them, including this part of the hook. So let's group them all together at once. And we can see that our finished shape has got this area nice and smooth underneath. It's flat against the wall here. And we'll just make it look correct there. Now we have a functional new version of our light switch cover. And just like many other things, there are plenty of options. You can create that back scratcher. You can add measured devices like this that will allow you to grab your light switch from below, or even go crazy and make a large hinged switch. While some of these may only be fun, it's quite possible that you could use something like this with a special handle on there for somebody who has an accessibility challenge. And all of these are created using the exact same methodology, simply adding and subtracting shapes. Now that we have our designs, we are going to prepare our modified light switch cover for slicing. Going to use my coat hook as the main example. We'll take a look at what we might have to do for something more complicated. The first step is always to take a look around and make sure that your objects are exactly how you want them to be from every direction. And then we go up here and export. And I'm going to choose only the selected shape since I have a lot of other examples. Create an STL file. And then we are going to head over to Cura. In Cura, we're going to open up our light switch download here and take another look again, make sure that there isn't a problem. You can see that the surface here is red, except for the lowest point, which is the bottom of the hook itself, which is blue because it is sitting on the surface. Now this distance might not be enough to matter, but I don't like the bottom edge of my thing not being actually on the floor of the printer. So let's return to TinkerCAD and make sure that we don't have a problem. I'll ungroup to the last step here, and we'll make sure that we hit D to drop all of our shapes on the floor so that the bottom edges of them are directly on the work plane and perfectly lined up. And we will group them again and see, right now I can still see this line here. So because of the geometry of the shape, TinkerCAD might be being confused. The two things overlapping each other perfectly. In which case I'll ungroup them and then go ahead and move this hook just up 1/16 of an inch. It's still combined with the shape underneath it since it's still overlapping, but the bottom does not share space with the geometry on the bottom here. So that should solve our issue. Let's group everything together again and click on export. Selected shape, STL, and we're going to get a new one, which we'll just number it. Then let's switch back over to Cura. Open up light switch modification 1. Now we can see that the entire bottom edge is blue, which is what we want to see. So our first layer will go down, stuck to the floor. The red area here, with that hollow space underneath it, is going to require supports, which we're then going to have to peel off afterwards. Also underneath the hook, we're going to need some support, otherwise this area is going to definitely become quite rough as it tries to print some plastic over the open space. So we'll have our supports turned on. I'll check my custom settings to make sure what my supports are set to. And we'll hit slice and click on preview. Now we can see that the printer is going to build a support underneath our hook. Scroll down here, right before it connects, it's going to have an area that has very little material so that it only touches in a few places, making it easy to disconnect from there. And the same with the spot where it is attached at the bottom. For a single part, this is the easiest way to print it. And if we were to make something more complex, first I will save this guy as G-code, which will be ready to upload to my printer. And then let us start a new project. And head back over to take a look at the most complicated switch. The light switch itself has the hinges on it, and the other two pieces are separate. We can't simply select them and drag them all out as one STL, or we would end up combining them together. So we will have to take our individual objects and export them. One at a time. I'm exporting this handle standing up, but it would be just as easy to rotate it into a good printing position here. However, back in Cura, I'll bring in all three of these parts and arrange them since they are separate STLs. We've got them set up on our build plate with the flattest area landed on the ground there. However, this one is going to need to lie down on its side. So inside of Cura, we can still make some modifications, changing the size, the position, and the rotation of our objects. I will turn this guy 90 degrees. And then we can go ahead and let Cura arrange all the models, and it will line them up as close to each other as it can. The closer your objects are, the less movement your printer has to make in open space before it gets to the next thing that it's going to print. We don't want to put our objects on opposite corners and make the printer work harder by moving back and forth in between each layer that it prints. While this doesn't seem to update properly, when we slice, we can take a look at our preview there and see, to be sure, that our bottom layer, our layer 1, is going to be attached to the ground. So you can see that the bottom layer of my handle is going to be printed on the floor of the printer. And it looks like this one is missing supports. So I'll have to turn support back on and slice again. I always go through the layers to make sure that it's printing the way I expect, that I haven't done anything accidentally wrong. You don't want to spend 6 hours printing something and find out the bottom was ruined because it doesn't have any supports. There you go. Have fun designing your own crazy light switches.